Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of This is Leadership, your intersection between growth and leadership. And today, folks, continuing on the study of the book Disrupt the Status Quo, or conversations based on it, on the book with the authors, I am so happy to welcome Christine Ravesi-Weinstein. Did I say that right?
You did.
Christine Ravesi-Weinstein, right on. So Christine is currently serves as a high school assistant principal in Massachusetts, US, and has previously worked as a high school science department chemistry teacher right here, Christine, by the way, science department chair for 4 years and classroom teacher for 15. Diagnosed with anxiety and depression at 23, Christine began her journey towards mental wellness. She began a nonprofit organization in June of 2017 aimed at removing the stigma of mental illness and promoting physical activity, love that as well, as a means to cope with anxiety. As an avid writer and educator, Christine became passionate about bridging the two with her advocacy for mental health. Since March of 2019, she has had numerous nationally published articles, including the #1 most read article of 2019 on eSchool News. She has also published articles with District Administration, the Teach Better Team, Tech and Learning, and also Smart Breathe. But let's not forget here, Christine, that you are also an author. Many books, a few books anyways. So you are the author of the books Anxious, as well as Fighting Your Inner Voice. And of course, for everybody that's watching on YouTube, Disrupt the Status Quo. And this is the one here that we're going to be talking about today. So Christine,
excellent.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you you doing this. It's an honor to be here. And I think every time I hear the book mentioned or you talk about my co-authors, I kind of wonder how I got connected with such an amazing group of educators and how they asked me to be a part of their project. It's really humbling. Sometimes I'm like, it can't possibly be real, but I guess it is.
Absolutely. So. And you know what? I'm a firm believer of providence, right? Things happen for a reason. So people come into our paths for a reason. And I think that definitely, what you guys have produced with Disrupt the Status Quo, the impact that you're having that I'm seeing on social media, the sales are speaking for themselves. I think you guys are like top 5, if not still the #1. I didn't check in the last couple of days, but I'm sure that if I go back to Twitter, I'll be able to find it pretty quick. So just the impact that you guys have been having with the book has been phenomenal. And the reason why, when I seen it and I picked up a copy and read it, I said, I have to do something with the podcast to be able to highlight the book. And so here we are, part 4 of the 5-part series. So you are the last author to be interviewed on the podcast. And then hopefully we'll be able to get everybody together for one final show and one final recording, and then get a few last thoughts and go with that. So it's really good to have you here, Christine. And it's great getting to know you as well. We were talking before we started recording how, we're hockey people, both our kids are elite hockey players and mine were. And we're talking about how, how time flies. It doesn't seem like it does when we're in the moment, but at some point, and you said you were starting to notice how, as they get older, it seems like, they get a little bit further away and we struggle to find, more time or quality time to be able to spend with them. But the kids sure do keep us busy, don't they?
They absolutely do. I mean, I might be able to write 10 more books if I didn't have kids, but I think that would get kind of lonely.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely.
But yeah, they're awesome. They keep me grounded, which, is wonderful. And they make me not sweat the small stuff. So
exactly.
Something to be said about that.
And we're going to talk, about that actually a little bit further. One of the things that stood out to me is actually, how kids perceive the world and how when we get old, we'll get into it there. I don't want to spoil it
absolutely.
for everybody that's listening to us. So I read a little bit of your biography, Christine, but and we know that the kids are in sports and you do have some children. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Maybe your 2 children, their names and their ages. And I know I want to get into this because it's a big part of my routine in my life as well. I know that you're into fitness and that's something that's really important to you. I see your posts on running. So tell us a little bit more about yourself so that the people listening to us today can get to know you.
So, professionally, I think that you did a great job with the intro, really summed me up. I'm right now, this is my 20th year in education. That seems to surprise a lot of people. I spent the first 15 as a teacher and department head towards the end, and then
Yeah.
this is my fifth year as a full-on administrator. When I started being a full-time administrator back in 2018, I met my co-author, Dr. Matthew X. Joseph,
Okay.
and we took to a really good friendship kind of right off the bat. We had a lot in common, and he knew about my nonprofit, and he was the one that was like, "Hey, have you ever thought about like taking what you do in your nonprofit and like writing about it from like an educational
Mm.
lens and like how you can service kids with anxiety and education?" And I was like, "People want to read that stuff?" Like, I'm not really sure. And so he kept
Yeah.
kind of like pushing because he was already doing a lot of that stuff outside of his day job. And so he really encouraged me to take a risk, which has become sort of
Mm.
my tagline. And so I started writing, and as he will attest, my success is not common in that most people when they start writing they don't get as many articles sort of picked up for publication
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
away, and so I would get discouraged really quick, and he would always have to remind me like, "You've already accomplished way more than some people have been doing this for years, and they've not landed a book deal or whatever." So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of like how my journey into that's like my professional life. My
Mm.
personal life, you talked a little bit about it, diagnosed with anxiety in my early 20s.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not that I didn't have it prior to that. I clearly did. um, in both the book Anxious and Fighting Your Inner Voice, I talk a little bit about that anxiety as a youth.
Mm.
um, and uh, I really struggled with kind of like my identity and who I was, and weird things. Well, not
Yeah.
weird, but things people don't talk about, like
Yeah.
concepts of beauty and concepts of, athleticism and these kinds of things. And I kind of eventually landed on my feet, which was quite the journey. I met someone at my first job. We got married, two beautiful kids, which you mentioned. My son is 9. His name is Nathan. My daughter is 6. Her name is Rory. Um, and I spend a ton of time with them. I work out a lot. I like to write, do these kinds of things. That's really like kind of me in a nutshell. I'm not too complicated. I'm a pretty straightforward, simple person. I think my thoughts get a little complicated, which
Yeah. Yeah.
fuels
Yeah.
the anxiety, right? But like, in terms of what I need to feel myself, which has taken me 42 years to figure out,
Mm.
and that's
Mm.
part of the journey.
Mm.
What I've discovered is it's really straightforward and simple. And I think that's what I talk about in the work that I do.
Yeah.
And I think it's simple, but I think it resonates with people because we feel like it needs to be more complicated and it really doesn't. So,
Yeah, we do that to ourselves. That we always tend to overcomplicate things, overthink. We keep looping in these
yeah.
thoughts, and
Hmm.
so I can understand that definitely. But being diagnosed, of course, you had to make sure that you started putting in, the processes and the habits that would be, that would help you, overcome, some of those obstacles.
Yeah,
And
and it's not the same for every person,
that's
right?
right.
And
That's right.
so that's the journey. It's like, okay, I've got this. I know what it is. How do I get to a place where I can live a successful life where I can be challenged and not succumb to the anxiety, and I can still get out there. I mean, it's not been a smooth road, and there are still
Yeah.
bumps, but to be able to figure out what works for me, and sharing my story is actually one part of like what I need. I think, when you live in it and you don't share it, it festers, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so like, I like helping others because I want others to be helped and be successful, but there's also a self-serving part. Like that's part of my coping as well.
I love that because it's, I'm listening to you talk, Christine, and it's basically like, when I think about my own growth journey, right? It's putting in processes, putting in the right habits,
Yep.
and meeting the right people and surrounding myself with the right people. And I'm hearing a similar process because really, okay, you're diagnosed with anxiety, right? But at the same time, is you're putting these things into place, and you're exercising, and you're working on that growth mindset. You're taking risks. You're telling your story. Those are all parts of the
Yes.
intentional things you're putting into place, not only to help you manage that, that anxiety, but also to help you grow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people ask me like, so should I go on medication? Should I do therapy? Do you think I should walk every day? I'm like, look, like I do all those things. Like
Yeah.
I'm medicated. I do therapy once a week
Yeah.
still.
Yeah.
My friends make fun of me because my routine, I'm so strict with my routine. Like write down the same time I wake up every day, my exercise routine, when I eat, what I eat, the time I go to bed, how much water I drink. Like people are like, why are you so, I'm like, because if I veer off, like if my physiology is off, then my emotional health becomes off. It's
Yeah.
so interconnected.
Yeah.
And so I tell people like explore all the options because it's a cocktail of things. And it's not going to be any one thing. You got to try things and see what that cocktail is and what works.
Exactly. And sometimes with time that cocktail can end up changing as well. So, some
Yeah,
things can
that's
work
the other
now,
thing.
but
Like,
maybe later it won't. So I think it's a great
yeah,
segue into the first, we're going to dive into the book now, Disrupt the Status
yep.
Quo. Ooh, here it is again for the people that are watching on YouTube. So in the introduction, and it comes back to a little bit what you were talking about, when you were struggling with things through high school, when it came to, how you looked and things like that, and
Yeah,
how you thought people were perceiving you. In the
yep.
introduction, you talk about, desire, how we fight the desire to be accepted and versus the desire to be ourselves. I thought like that jumped out
Yeah.
at me because I thought of my first year as a principal way back in 2006. I've been a school principal since 2006. And I remember starting on the job and a little bit like teaching, right? We'll often teach how we were taught, and we
Yeah.
have administrators throughout our careers, and you'll keep a few pieces from them and then think that that's the best way to do it. But I quickly realized that I was actually I had that kind of a battle inside of me. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about that? The desire
Yeah.
to be accepted versus the desire to be ourselves.
So when I was young, it was actually really like superficial.
Okay.
Growing up, I was a complete tomboy, right? I
Yeah.
had three older brothers. I was an athlete. I grew up, in a household that I think maybe at the time we were considered like middle income, but like we really weren't. We weren't impoverished, but we didn't have a lot of money. So like I got hand-me-downs. Well, I had three older
Yeah.
brothers, so
Yeah.
I'm wearing like Boston Celtics t-shirts with
Yeah.
like Larry Bird on it, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I had very short hair when I was a little kid.
Yep. Yep.
I just that's what I did, and so I got teased and made fun of a lot because of the way I looked,
Yeah.
and because I was a tomboy, and you know, she's gay, she wants to
Yeah.
be a boy, all the things that like are just awful. And so by the time I got to high school, I couldn't stand kind of the bullying anymore. So I grew my hair out because
Okay.
I felt like that's what I needed to do to be accepted. So very superficial thing, but for me was very symbolic,
Mm.
right? So I grew my hair out, and I had long hair up until senior year in high school,
Okay.
and I hated it. I hated it because it's not who I identified as. Like it just
Mm.
wasn't how I felt. So like I kind of cut it a little bit shorter, and I did this kind of like bob thing through college. And then one of my childhood friends asked me to be in her wedding.
Okay.
Um, and I tell this story in my book, Fighting Your Inner Voice. And so I had never been in a wedding before. I was like,
Okay.
yes, this is great. Like, this is awesome. And so I was going to have to wear a dress, which is something I never did as a kid. Like,
Mm.
I wasn't comfortable. And so we went bridesmaid dress shopping with all of the
Okay.
bridesmaids and the
Yeah. Yeah.
bride. Like,
Yeah.
and so, again, I had short-ish hair. It wasn't really long. I couldn't put it up. Let's put it to you that way. Like I couldn't
Okay.
put it in a ponytail.
So it wasn't like
Um,
the big 80s hair there. It was
no, it
more
wasn't like it
Bobby
wasn't like
90s there. So
yeah, it was like to here.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
I
yeah,
could like pin it back, but like there was no
yeah,
ponytail that we
yeah.
had.
Okay. Okay.
And so she said a really really awful thing to me in the car. where she said, Christine, can you can you grow your hair out? Because all the other bridesmaids are going to have like this updo thing,
Wow. Yeah.
and you won't be able to. And then she called me, something very homophobic
Mm, mm,
after that.
mm,
So that was a huge turning point for me in my life.
mm.
I went to the hairdresser. I asked him to cut up all my hair. So now I have a complete short haircut,
Yep.
and I've had it ever since. That was, God, I couldn't remember the exact date. I do remember it was April, probably of like '08, April 20,
Wow.
2008, like
Okay.
back then, maybe a
Yeah.
little bit
Yeah.
later than that.
Yeah.
I don't know, around there, give or take a couple of years. And I never looked back. And I was like, I'm not going to please people, but like, why am I going to sacrifice myself? And then as I got older and had kids, I really started to understand what beauty was. I
Mm.
understood what made me comfortable. That whole like beauty's on the inside bullshit that they tell you when you're a little
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah.
Like, let's
Yeah.
face it, right? Like, when you're
Yep.
a little kid,
Yep.
it's like,
Yep.
yeah, you say that the crust is the best part of the pizza because you try to get me to eat it, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's
Exactly.
not really the best part. But what I realized that statement meant is that what makes a person beautiful is what resonates from the inside out, right? And so if I walk with
Absolutely.
confidence, whether my hair is blonde or brown or short or long, none of that matters. It's what my expression is, it's how I carry myself. Um, and so when I started to feel that way personally, I started to glow more at work, and I became a better educator because I no
Nice.
longer cared about how everyone else expected me to be. I
Hmm.
cared about what I wanted to do because it's how I felt, what made me feel good, who I believed I was. And my world changed.
Yeah.
It changed for the better in a lot of ways. And it changed for the worse in some ways too, because with that, as the book talks about, when you make a drastic change like that, you're going to get a lot of people that feel like empowered and like this is amazing, but you're going to get a lot of haters too.
Mm. Yeah.
And that's why we often don't do it, because we worry about the backlash. And there was a lot of backlash for me, but I kept going, right? I
Yeah.
kept going
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy that I did, because obviously, I mean, it sounds trite, but I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't. If I was still a brown haired, long haired girl, like no makeup, just, not wearing heels to
Yeah.
work, if I was
Yeah.
that person that I was 25 years ago, we wouldn't be talking right now. I know that for sure.
Yeah. Often it takes, it takes an event, for us to realize, to shake us up, or just to make a decision and say, you know what, I need to stop this, and I need to be myself. And it's,
Yep.
first of all, it's way too much work not being yourself. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
It is. It's so much work.
it's
It's
too much work.
stressful.
Yeah, exactly. It's too much work and too much worrying. But it's so true when you say that, you know, often we won't take a risk, or we won't do something. And I can think of some things right now that are going through my mind throughout my career as an educator, not just as school principal, but as a classroom educator as well, of things that I didn't try, out of fear of what people would think,
Hmm.
or the impressions are. And when you actually think about it, often, and this is a great question for the people that are listening, I want you to think about whenever, there was a time when you would have wanted to say something or do something, but you were afraid of the reaction. Now, the reaction, the people that would have given you backlash, what is the percentage of those people? Like, is it, because in my experience, often it's like it represents about 2%. The ones that speak the
You're
loudest and
right.
have the biggest personalities, it'll feel like there's 25 of them, but it's actually a minority, right? So often,
Hmm.
when we think through it, and we're like, you know what, if I weigh the pluses and the minuses,
This is,
not only am I losing out, but maybe by not, going forward or being myself, or, proposing something, in the long run, a whole bunch of other people that surround me are gonna miss out.
yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's one of the things we talk about, perception, right? The
Yeah,
perspective that you
that's
have
right.
on things. One of the things for me through therapy, early on when I started therapy, that my therapist said to me, that I'm like, damn, like that, we're so worried about what other people think of us.
Yeah.
We're so worried about it, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
just a natural fear. We want to be loved and accepted, right?
Hmm.
We're social beings.
That's right.
But what we don't realize is that while we're sitting there so worried about what everybody else thinks because we think they're thinking of us. No, they're not. They're thinking of themselves. They're just as worried about what everybody thinks of them. They don't have
Yeah.
time to worry about you, right? And
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
like that was a turning point for me where I'm like, why am I putting so much stock in what other people think when all that I got to live with me,
that's right.
right? What do I think? And it's not easy. I mean, we talk about it like we've got it all figured out, and that's I still have my moments of complete self doubt and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
lack of confidence or whatever it
absolutely.
might
I
be.
had some
But
today.
yeah, yeah, but like
uh,
I had some last week towards the
yeah,
end where I had made a decision at work that
yeah.
wasn't favorable towards everybody that I work with, and
Mm,
I had this moment where I'm like, damn, I really thought I knew how to do this job. Like I really thought that I was confident and I could make decisions that were going to please everybody, and it was sort of like it brought me back down to reality.
yeah,
Um, but what made the difference for me was to be able to sit with my boss and say, "Yeah, I made that decision. This is why. Given what I knew, this is why I made the decision. I stand by it,
yeah,
but I also understand your perspective, and next time that will weigh a lot more in my decision making." And my
yeah,
boss was like, "Okay, that's really what we want to hear." So
yeah. Can you imagine
I
how?
ye- years ago I wouldn't have had the confidence to admit that perhaps I made the wrong decision. But now it's like so much easier to be like, yeah, maybe I did make the wrong decision because there's other perspectives than my own.
Yeah, well, exactly right. And heaven forbid if we never made any mistakes. I think life would be pretty boring. That's for sure. We wouldn't be we wouldn't be working in the buildings. We'd be working because if we knew everything right off the bat when we're
Right,
born, there wouldn't be any schools. But
right.
it makes me think what you're saying. How you have to do it for you first, right? It's the same concept as the oxygen mask in the plane, right? If that oxygen mask
Hmm.
drops, you got to put it on you first, right,
Right.
before you can help other people. And the same goes with your happiness, same goes with your growth, same goes. And I think that one of the reasons why we have that guilt, or we have that inner struggle, is because we want to please, right? We want to please others. We want them, you
Yeah.
said it, we want them to be happy, we want them to be comfortable, we don't want them to feel awkward and all this stuff. But it starts with us. You got to put that oxygen mask on yourself first,
Yeah.
right, before you do it
Yep.
to other people.
Right. And I'm the one that's got to lay my head on the pillow at night. Right. And so,
Exactly.
um, as long as I can explain my rationale, and as long as I am able to say, like, I totally see your perspective, like, I'm okay with that. I'll, consider it next time. I'll make a better, a different decision next time. I think that's really all anyone can ask of us. Right. Like,
Hmm.
I don't think anyone else is expecting perfection from us. I think we expect it from ourselves, but we project that. We're like, well, you expect me to be perfect. No, 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 no. I'm expecting myself to be perfect, and I need to give myself grace. That's been like my motto this fall: is give
Mm.
yourself some grace, right? Like
Yeah.
it's okay to not have it all figured out.
Yeah, yeah, and I think in a sense, and you guys touch on it in the book. I think we're the part of it is we're programmed like that, right? We talk about school and this thought about, and that's in the failure part as well. I think of the book.
Yeah,
We're going to get into that now, where what is it about school that makes us think that we should know how to do something after seeing it once? I'm paraphrasing.
yeah,
That's what you wrote in the book,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
and
that's what I was
that's
writing
what you're
about.
talking about. So we grew up and we went through that system as well. So I don't know if we were a little conditioned that way a little bit, and now we're realizing different things as we get older and we experience different things and we connect with different people that make us see different points of views. But it's interesting that you're talking about that, and how if we're realizing it now as adults and we're in the school systems, well, should we make our students wait till they're 43, 50, they're
Yeah,
going to be 50 to realize it, or should we help them realize it before?
I know. I mean, like I think of like my childhood, and everything about my childhood was trying to avoid failure,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like in school, in sports, everything. But like everything about adulthood is failing and trying to pick yourself back up. Like it's the exact opposite, right? Like, in the book I talk about the analogy of learning how to ride a bike,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
if
that's
when
right.
we learn how to ride a bike, we did it like in school, we all would have gotten on the bike, failed, and never picked up the bike again.
Yeah, we did it
But
once,
that's not how it
right?
works,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like in the way it would have been done in school is that we would have watched someone else do it.
Hmm.
We would have been able to repeat the steps of how to do it, but then we would have gotten on the bike and we still wouldn't have been able to do it, right? Because that's something that's all about feel. You just
Yeah.
got to keep doing it until you figure out balance.
Yeah.
But in real life, that's not how it works. You get on the bike, you ride, you fall over. You get on the bike, someone holds the seat until they let go, and then you realize they've let go, and then you fall, right? Like there's this whole process that involves failing again, learning a little bit, failing again, figuring out a different thing, failing again, right? I mean, my son's an elite hockey player. He didn't put on a pair of skates and just go
Yeah.
out there and start skating around. Like
Yeah.
it was all about failing. I do this with my body, I fall. Okay, I got to learn how to stay on this edge, whatever it is. But we're so afraid of our kids failing, you know. And I hate the word too because it has such a negative connotation, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't like fail forward. It's like it's not that you failed. To me, failure is like there's such an ultimate feeling to it.
Yeah. There's an
It
ending.
feels,
It's a finality.
yeah, there's a finality to it,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
like in the end, you don't fail at bike riding. You fall off and then eventually you learn how to ride a bike. Like
Yeah.
that's what we're doing here. And I think we as educators got to be okay with failing. We look at like the evaluation system, how teachers are evaluated, and teachers don't want to take risks because they're so afraid they're going to fail the evaluation. Like,
Yeah.
no, try something new. Like, all we care as administrators is that you're trying to grow.
Well,
You
that's what
know?
it is, right? And that evaluation to me as an administrator I didn't always think of it that way, but I progressed and I evolved. And for many years, that evaluation, and I would tell the teachers or the people that I was evaluating, this is just like a snapshot of your journey of getting better all the
Yeah,
time, right? So, and that's how you got to say it. It's all about the way we see failure, right? And I think a good lesson could be that we can learn, and it came out a little bit in your part in failure is how kids see. It's funny how failure, we have an issue with it as we get older. Kids, will see them in JK, in kindergarten and grade 1. It's
yeah.
amazing. They don't care.
They
They'll
don't
they'll
get.
fall. They don't care. They won't look around and see, who saw me fall. But it's
Yeah,
funny, why is it that kids, when they're younger, it's not a big deal, but then all of a sudden,
I
I
think
guess it's an
it's
awareness
yeah.
thing.
I think it's because in the end there's just I think kids, there's a goal, there's something they want to do, and they're just solely focused on that, and they
Yeah, yeah,
shut
yeah.
everything else out,
In-
right? And it
Interesting.
doesn't matter how many times it takes, like they're going to get that. Like it's the same thing when they fuss because they want a piece of candy, right? Like they're not
Yeah,
worried about what their fussing looks like to everybody else because they just want that candy. So when my son's learning how to skate, he doesn't care how silly he looks falling because he just wants to learn how to skate.
yeah,
But as we get older, we start to realize like, oh, there's all these people around us. We understand like judgment, and we start to
exactly.
fear that.
Yeah,
And so it eliminates the beauty of curiosity and the beauty of wanting to learn and try new things, you know?
exactly, exactly.
That's why it's so much easier to learn things when you're younger, not just because you're more pliable when you're younger, but like because you don't know any better,
Yeah,
right?
and
When you get older, it's not just the fear of getting hurt, it's the
no,
fear of being laughed at,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. It gets noisy, right? There's a whole bunch of noise that adds
Yeah.
to it, and it's so much, like you said, the focus when you're young, it's so much just it's clearer, and it's just that
Yeah.
the noise is gone. They're able to just get it up because, in part, because maybe they don't know the noise is there, but eventually
Yeah.
that's what we find out is there, and we start worrying about it. But I think that if we get to thinking about that, and if we really, be intentional about developing that mindset when it comes to, and like you said, the word isn't good. Failure is really learning, because if you're failing, it means that you're learning, because you can't get it right off the bat the first time. Most things, anyways. I think some things maybe we'll get lucky, but most things is we're not going to get it right away. So that means that we got to try again, or we got to practice a little bit more. But when talking about schools, Christine, and the failure, I'm going to stay in there a little bit longer. What's your take on assessments? Now, I know that's a big question, but when it comes to working on that mindset that we have out there about failure, and how the finality of tests, just give me the mark, miss, just give me my mark. That's all. Don't give me feedback. I just want to know what my final mark was. So, what's your take on assessments in schools today?
So I really don't like standardized assessments.
Yeah,
I live in Mass, and so our standardized assessment is referred to as the MCAS. And so every high school student needs to pass it in order to get a high school diploma, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, and what the issue that I had, in fact, I was just at my current job having a discussion about midterm exams and,
Okay.
you know, how much should midterms weigh and should we
Yeah.
even give midterms? And I'm like, I finally jumped in and I was like, what's the point of them? And everyone was like, well, so that they can get used to taking a big test. I'm like, no, that, like they take a final exam. You can make that argument for the final exam. That's not what I'm asking. What's the point of a midterm? Well, because you have midterms in college. I never had a midterm in college. I had a final. I never once had a midterm, right? If the reason for the assessment is to get data for the teachers so that they can realize like, okay, kids struggled here, so we need to do more work in
Exactly.
getting them to understand this standard, like I'm all for it. Assessments are never used that way,
No,
right?
no.
And like I think that's what we need. You want some baseline data, you want to see how students are improving, you want to see how your teaching is improving. Let's do it. But that's not how it's done. I mean, even grading. Like if you want to talk assessment, you got to talk grading, right? Like
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't understand, why are we grading out of 100? Because a 0 and a 50 is the exact same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's the difference between a 0 and a 50? Like
Yeah.
it's just whether the kid is mathematically out of it or still in it, right?
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
like it's all just, it's still subjective. I would have teachers where I'm like, okay, passing is a 60 and you gave the kid a 58. No, I didn't. That's what the computer gave them. And I'd be like, what? Like, wait, what? That's what the computer spit out.
Mm.
Like, and I'm dumbfounded because if that's what I'm working with, like, we have a long way to go, right?
Absolutely.
We have a really long way to go.
Yeah.
And you mean to
Yeah.
tell me that difference between failing and passing had nothing to do with the fact that it was midnight and it was the 57th lab report you were grading and
Yeah.
you just didn't have anything left
Exactly.
and you took points off because the lines weren't straight. Now the kids like, so,
Very
um,
subjective.
yes, even numerical grading is very, very, very subjective, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I talk a little bit about failure in my AP class that I taught, my science course, and I
Yeah.
talk about specifically like how I conducted labs, right,
Yep.
and
Yep.
experiments and such. But another thing I did with that class that I was really proud of that I didn't talk about in the book, but I easily could have is assessments and how we did assessments. So as an advanced placement course, the kids were all taking a standardized test at the end of the year. And so part of my job as their teacher is, of course, to prepare them for that assessment, right?
Hmm.
It's not
Hmm.
the only thing that I needed to do in that course, but it's still something I had to do. So the tests that they would take in my class were formatted in the same way as that
Okay.
standardized
Okay.
test. So they would take the test, and then after they would come and sit down with me one on one, and we would go over every single question they got wrong. And instead of just passing back in what a lot of teachers might call like test corrections, because they don't learn anything from that, they just go to their classmate and they're like, what was the answer to 8? They're
Yeah.
like C, they write down C and they
Yeah.
pass it in. Like, so I would make them come after school and they'd sit and we'd talk about each one of them. Okay,
Mm.
so number 8 you got wrong. Why? And they'd be like, well, so I was thinking about it like this,
Mm.
but now I understand that I should have thought about it like this. And the answer is this because of X, Y, and Z or whatever. And I'm like, awesome. That's great. Right. You know the standard now. You've
Mm.
gotten it. And so their grade was a mix of how they did the first time and then how they
Absolutely.
did when they sat down with me. Right. Um, and that was an eye-opening experience as an educator and also for my students. My students stopped fearing tests.
Mm.
They actually looked forward to the time they would spend with me after school talking about their exams. It's where they learned the most. Um, it was really eye-opening for me. And then it got me thinking, like, how can we do something like that in schools? Because it's so time consuming, right? Have to
Well,
sit down
that's
with
the
each
biggest
kid.
issue, right? That's the biggest question you'll get from teachers is that where am I going to find the time to do that? But there is, I know some teachers that do it and they've got classrooms with 30 kids, 28 kids. So I think it is possible, maybe not all the
It
time for
is.
every student, but I think it is possible. And what you're speaking to, Christine, is competencies. That's what you were working on with your kids. And the biggest question, our school board, we're working with with an expert, and we're talking about evaluation. We're talking about direct instruction and stuff like that. And And I think the biggest questions that the biggest realization that I've made in the last 2 years, I'd say is, what is the test? And you mentioned it, right? Is it really a reflection of the student's learning from where he's at to where he is now? Or is it a
Mm-hmm.
reflection of what I taught and what the student is able to just spit back out at me on a test?
Right, right.
Right. And
Until you know what the objective behind the assessment is, you're never going to get the assessment right.
yeah,
Right? Like you have to know why and what you're testing in order for it to be effective.
yeah,
And it's amazing when you get a group of teachers in a room and you ask them, they can't agree.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
they
yeah.
all are going to say something different. Well, we're doing it for this reason. We're doing it for that reason, or for this reason. You're like, what? Like, if we can't even decide why we're doing it, why are the kids going to buy in?
Yeah, exactly. And that comes to, you were talking about in that chapter, the failure chapter, problem solving versus problem answers, right? And I think it comes down to
Yeah.
developing those competencies and those processes. And to get back to the comment of we're getting them ready for college and university, it's funny because that expert, that we're working with that I just mentioned, he's actually a
Yeah.
university teacher. So
Okay.
we met
So there you go.
with our high school teachers, and he just told them straight out. He debunked that. He said, "Listen," he said, "when the kids are coming into university and college, this is what we're looking for. We want students that know how to organize themselves. We want students that
Hmm.
can timetable. We want students that are able to prioritize things." But so he's naming off all of these competencies and not necessarily the content. We know that they're getting content. Are they going to
Yeah.
remember everything that they learned? Most likely not, because it depends on how you taught it. But these are the things we're looking for in our students is based on competencies. Are they able to? Do they know how to study? Do they know how to
Right.
make a lunch because they're going to be in residence or whatever, not at home and fending for themselves? Do they know how to take notes? Do they know how to? It's these are the things that they're looking for in post-secondary, and not necessarily these content elements in
Right.
a test or a final
Exactly.
exam.
Well, because the content element, if you can do all those competencies, then you can conquer any content element, right?
And that
And
follows you
like,
your whole life, right?
right. And, in the book, I talk about the unit circle and how
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
always get
yeah,
into it with my students
yeah.
about the
I love that
damn
one.
unit circle, right?
Yeah,
Like that, like, and I tell them, like, I was as high achieving a math student as you can possibly get in the secondary level. And I don't know any of it. But what I do know is how to be successful. That's what those courses taught me.
hmm
How to organize, how to ask questions when you don't, how to advocate, like how to have pressure on you and rise to the challenge. But kids they don't understand that. They're like, nope, I got to know what the cosine of 3 pi/2 is.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And having kids memorize things they can just look up is still something I don't understand. Like, why do chemistry teachers test kids on the periodic table?
Yes, 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 yes.
Like, it's a table that you can look up, like that.
There's a really big one on the wall in the class. It's
Right.
like,
Like, I don't understand. Like, why
yeah,
are we
yeah.
memorizing these things? Well, you should really know 1 through 18. Well, yeah, but the more you use it, then you just remember it because you're
You'll
using it
remember it.
all the time, all the time, all the time, right? Like,
Exactly.
you have to sit there and rote memorize things. Like, it doesn't serve a purpose. Anything you can look up, it doesn't make sense to have to memorize it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, that's it's crazy, but you know what? I think that we're making some leeway in the schools for sure when it comes to that. Anyways, there's a lot of
Oh, we are, yeah.
a lot of conversations around evaluation and competency, developing those competencies, those skills within our students. But if we could jump into the perspective part
Sure.
of the book, yeah. So, one of the things that really stood out to me when talking about perspective was this, and I love the way that you said it, this obsession of being right. You
Yeah.
talked about that, how, and I think he had given the example was in politics, right? Where, some people, they have their favorite candidate in their party, but when talking to them, it's just what they say goes, and we don't give a crap about the rest, but we don't care what you think about. I'm right, and that's it. So, what is it with, what are the possible consequences of not having that perspective, or not, wanting to even learn or
I
or
think
consider other perspectives.
the when you don't consider other perspectives, you cannot grow. I mean, that's the bottom line. And if that's
I
all
love that.
learning is, it's just growing,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so if you fail to see the other perspective, you're crushing the learning process right from the get-go. It's not even going to get started.
Yeah.
And that's what's really, really challenging for me. Like, one of the things I notice at work that really gets me frustrated is when people have a lack of perspective, right? Like, I don't need you to think I'm right. I just need you to be able to be like, oh yeah, I hadn't considered that. That's it. That's
That's
all I
right.
need to hear from you.
That's right.
That's it. That's just an acknowledgement that perhaps there's a different viewpoint. You can still have your own viewpoint, but like, you wouldn't want your students or your own kids to make a decision without all of the information at the table first, right? Like, right? Like, think about relationships. Like, as a parent,
Mm.
I hope that my son and daughter, before they get into a relationship with someone, they're going to see everything, right? Like, they're
Yeah.
not just going to have like blinders on and be like,
Yeah.
well, they pay for dinner every time we go out, so that's why I want to be with this person. Like, what? Like, there's so many other things that you need to consider, right? And we would give that guidance to our own child, like, before you date someone, consider everything.
That's
But
right.
when it comes to our students or our colleagues, we don't take that perspective.
Yeah.
The perspective is like, I'm right. And I can't work with people that are so beholden to their beliefs that they don't even want to consider it could be done
Yeah.
differently. I have so much trouble
Yeah.
with that.
That's a lot of closed-minded, right? Closed-minded people that, I've always said, well, maybe not that way, but lately, um, everyone that I meet knows something that I don't. So even though I can be talking
Yeah.
about something and I think, and I know I've got the facts, I've got the science that backs it, whatever it is, I can think that I'm 100,000% right, but you know what? I still want to hear that other person out, because they might just say something that'll say, okay, maybe I was right, but this opened my thinking up in a different
Yeah,
avenue that I didn't think of. But in my opinion, everybody that we meet every day knows something that we don't, so we can learn from them.
absolutely. Absolutely. You're so right about that. I mean, the story I talk about in the book is about my water jug,
Yes,
like
the
how
water jug. Yeah, yeah,
the water jug, which
yeah.
actually is not currently on the table. It's just right
I'm
over there on the
surprised. No.
couch. But but like, it's so funny for me because I think that when I sat down to write that section of the book, there had been a lot of recent comments about my water jug because I just started a new
Yeah,
job. So
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
and so I sat down and I wrote it. And now it's been a couple of months since I actually sat down to write it. And I am still getting comments about the goddamn water jug. Like,
really.
it's just, it doesn't go away. It's like every
Yeah,
new person is like,
yeah,
you drank that much water during the day?
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah,
oh
yeah,
my God. Like, and it's so true because I've talked to people who read the book. They're like, that part about if it were coffee is 100% right. If I saw someone walking around with that much coffee, I wouldn't think twice about it, right?
that's
Like,
true. That's true.
oh yeah, I would resonate with it. Like, I need that much coffee, but God forbid the thing that sustains life someone is engaging in, they're a freak, right? So it's, and like, when I present it that way, like, well, I work out a lot, and so I gotta drink a lot of water. They're like, oh, really? You do? It makes for like the most awkward conversation
Yeah,
ever. Like, you think we'd be talking about how we were like, conceived. That's how
yeah,
awkward the
yeah, yeah,
conversation
yeah,
is. We're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about water, people. And it's just, gosh, it's amazing to me that in a world where we are working to embrace more diversity and different
yeah,
perspective, you start meeting people with fewer and fewer perspectives.
yeah, yeah,
It's a big irony. I
yeah.
feel like, when I was growing up, there was more openness to perspective than there is now.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it's we're centered on, like, it's almost as if we have blinders on, and it's really just our world, right? So we'll compare what's going on the outside to us. Well,
right.
I don't drink a big jug of water like that, so what the heck's going on here? Why are you doing that? So it's that.
Oh, and it's awesome when I meet someone else who does the same thing as me. They're like, "Hey,
Yeah, yeah,
oh my
yeah.
God,
That's
I
the big
carry a jug
celebration
too."
there.
Yeah, it's like we're
You
like,
guys like
"Hey, we found
cheer
someone
the
just like
jugs.
yes, yes," or we'll like compete, like, "How far through your jug are you today?" But
Oh,
it's
geez,
like,
that's funny.
we're an anomaly.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's crazy.
yeah,
And it's again, um, it stops the learning process when
Yeah.
you don't want to see another perspective, or you become judgmental about a different perspective,
I
right?
like that.
Like, just
Absolutely.
take a step back, consider it. Not asking you to change, but
Right.
consider it, reflect on it, and maybe you'll be like,
Yeah.
that makes sense. You'll learn something, right?
Yeah. Well, everything to gain and nothing to lose, right? So you might as well hear the
Yeah,
person out, and
exactly.
they might surprise you. You might end up like
Yeah,
high-fiving and sharing that water jug with the other person. So
yeah,
you never know.
absolutely.
You never know.
You never
So
do.
yeah, so that's great, Christine. And there were two elements in the voice section of the book that I want to talk to you about. The
Okay.
first one was when you talked about, when you were young, and you would get told, that you need to be seen and not heard, and that just
Yeah.
spoke to me. It just reminded me of the power of of adult words that they can have on the kids, right? So did you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny because it seems like such like a little thing.
Yeah,
And I think when I was younger, it upset me when I would hear that, but I didn't understand like the depth or the level of it. And it was only like as I started my journey learning about myself and my anxiety that I realized the impact that that one statement had on
yeah,
me, as I got older. Just having, being afraid to speak up,
yeah, yeah,
because feeling like my voice was not valued, all because of and the thing that's crazy is like I can understand, again, you want to talk about perspective. I can understand the sentiments behind that phrase.
mm,
Really, it's like we're adults here, we're talking, this isn't a conversation for you. You should, go over
yeah,
there and
yeah,
play,
yeah,
right? And so I completely understand that, but because it's said in the tone and the manner in which it is, it makes you feel like you don't have a voice at all.
yeah.
Um, and that really, really impacted me. And you're right, the power of words when you're so young and impressionable, um, at a time where my curiosity shouldn't have been stifled.
Mm,
It was absolutely stifled. It was a phrase that my mom would say to me. It was a phrase I remember, like at family reunions, right? When the
yeah,
adults would be
yeah.
talking, I was like, hey, you should be seen and not heard. Like that was, yeah, it's a tough one for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I think we need to, we need to definitely watch the words that we use because, the kids are
yeah,
listening, and they'll and the whole problem is not the fact that they don't understand the words, is they don't understand always the context, right? So we'll say it in a way that
correct.
adults understand because we're an adult, but it can have a whole other
And
impact on the child. So maybe we need to
we,
explain to the child a little bit more, the
yeah, and we have to remember that kids are very literal, right? Like
yeah,
very, very literal.
yeah,
Like my mom used to say to me, like, Christine, put a lid on it,
yeah,
which meant like shut up,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And so I would like pretend to like take something and put it on my head because I was literally putting a lid on it. And so it's very hard. I think of it like idioms if you're learning a new language.
mm,
So like, you say to someone like, it's so hot I could fry an egg.
yeah,
And they're like, well, why
that's
would
right.
you fry an egg outside? Like, it doesn't make any sense. They don't understand that it's just an idiom, right?
Yeah,
Because when you're learning a new language, you're literal. You take everything literally. And that's the problem with a statement like that, is that to a kid, it's like, I should literally be seen and never heard from.
yeah, pretty much.
And so I think we need to be careful with that. It goes to like not using sarcasm in a classroom, right? Because kids take it literally. It's the same idea,
Absolutely.
and that can really negatively impact student voice. And student voice is really what makes a classroom hum. And we don't want to do anything to stifle that.
Exactly. So, we gotta watch what we say, how we say it, and are we explaining context? But it's funny you talking about student voice. That was the second piece that really stood out to me in the voice section of the book. And it's one of those things where but you don't realize it. And then when you
Yeah,
read it,
yeah,
you're
yeah.
like, yeah, you know what, that's true. And it's like, wow, it's like just a little wow moment. And so it's when you said, voice isn't just verbal.
Yeah, it's
And it's
not.
so true. Yeah, I thought about it, all the times that when we talk about student voice, and we're always thinking, if they're speaking it, or a survey, but there's so many other
Yeah,
different, formats of student voice. So I thought that was it was pretty powerful when you talked about, student
thank
voice
you.
is not just verbal, but it's about communication and connection.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, We talk about building positive relationships in classrooms and connecting with our students, but you know, a majority of communication is nonverbal.
Yeah.
And we've got to, if we're in tune with our students and we really have the relationships and the bonds that we claim we do, then we should be able to tell when a student is off, or we should be able to tell through body language that a student is anxious, or
Yeah.
we should be able to tell that a student is dysregulated because, of a behavior or whatever the case may be. And I think, again, we're so sometimes as teachers driven by like, I got to get through this content. I mean, how many times do you hear like, we're running out of time, we got to hurry this up?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like, well,
Yeah.
what's more important, the content or the connection? And we stifle student voice sometimes because of our own voice, and we just like it's sage on a stage. But we also stifle student voice because we fail to recognize and make connections with kids.
Yeah.
And those are going to be the loudest voices, is all that nonverbal communication.
And I think that more often than not, from what I've seen, it's not that isn't intentionally done. It's really, we've got some teachers that are well intentioned and they think they're doing the best thing, but maybe because we're not reflecting on that, or not stopping long enough to be able to think about what's my impact when I'm doing this in the classroom in terms of voice, we're just not realizing it.
Right. 100%,
Yeah.
or like a simple thing like that student that walks into class late, right? And
Yeah.
they like are trying to like come in quietly. They don't want to make a scene. And you're like, hey, you're late. Like,
Yeah,
okay, you're not
exactly.
listening to that student's voice, right? That student is like coming in coy because they don't want to make a spectacle, and you just made a spectacle,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Exactly.
So like little things like that, I think we need to do a better job of in a classroom.
You're so right, Christine. This has been a
Thank you.
fantastic conversation. I'm loving every minute of it. Christine, I'm going to ask you the next question. I asked the
Okay.
same question to all of the authors, and I'm going to ask you now. So, of course, we're talking about disrupt the status quo. What does that mean to you? Disrupt the status quo.
That's a good question. For me, disrupt the status quo, it literally means to kind of push the envelope and do things differently than they're expected to be done. So, I say take the risk. It's not about what if
Yeah,
it goes wrong, it's about what if it turns out right. Taking the risk is disrupting the status quo.
love that.
They're one and the same. And so, I hope that people read the book and the stories resonate and inspire them to realize that we're not asking you to make huge change. We're not asking you to take massive risk. But what we are asking you to do is to realize that over the course of every day, we have opportunity to disrupt the status quo. And we need to empower one another to do that, because small changes can make big gains. So that's really what it means for me.
That's awesome. Glass half full all the time,
Thank
right?
you.
That's the
It's gotta
that's the
be.
mindset. That's
It's
the
gotta
mindset we
be.
got to have. I love it. I love it. So listen,
Gotta be.
Christine, for the people that are listening to us, how can they reach you if they would want to get a hold of you?
So the best way to reach me is through Twitter. My handle is just at Ravesi-Weinstein. They can, direct message me, or they can shoot me an email. It's just cravesi-weinstein@gmail.com. If they have any questions or they're curious about me or my other books, they can just go to my website, which is ravesi-weinstein.com. Everything is there. That's really the only social media stuff I do. As you can tell, I couldn't get my AirPods to work.
But you
That's
did
about
get it
all
to
I
work.
can
You
handle.
did get
I
it to work,
did,
though.
yeah. I needed
That
some
was
serious
awesome.
guidance, but I that's really all I can handle. Being a single mom and
Yeah.
the full-time job and stuff. I can't. All these people that are on like Instagram and this and that. I'm like,
Yeah.
I can't do it. It's
Yeah.
just too
Yeah.
much.
Well, for those of you that would like to get a hold of Christine, we will link up all of those different ways that you can do it on our website. So just head on out to inspireleadership.ca in the podcast section, and we will have a few show notes with Christine's information. If you'd like to get a hold of her, you go ahead and do so. You don't be shy. Don't be shy. She's a great person,
Don't be shy.
as you can see on YouTube and as you can hear everywhere else and here on YouTube as well. But don't be shy. So Christine, I've loved our conversation. I'm so happy
Me
that
too. Thank you so
you
much.
took the time to talk with us. I've got one last question for you before I let you go
Okay, go
tonight.
ahead.
So,
Yep.
and it's actually for the people that are listening to us. So Christine, if you had one wish, based on the conversation we had in the book, if you had one wish for the people listening to us right now at this moment, what would that wish be?
oh my God, if I had one wish for people, is that they were comfortable being themselves all the time. Because we can't help kids if we're not comfortable with who we are. So I know
Wow.
that this book for me has been really about sharing aspects of my story where
Mm,
I kind of was like, yeah, this is who I am, and I'm finally comfortable with it.
beautiful.
And you know, yeah, I think that that's what I wish for everybody, for themselves and for their students.
That's great, Christine. Thanks. And if you haven't had
Thank you.
if you did not get a copy of your book, get on Amazon. It's available everywhere. So Disrupt the Status Quo. I will link it also to the show notes, so you'll be able to click it there as well to be able to
Absolutely.
get a copy and get to reading the book. So, Christine, thank you so much, Hockey Mom. I know you're
Thank
busy,
you.
so
Yes.
and VP as well. So I really appreciate it. I'm so happy I met with you and I talked with you. You're
Mhm.
a fantastic person. I
Thank
loved
you.
connecting with you.
You
I
as
think we've got
well.
a lot of similarities and with the
Yeah,
families
we
and the
do.
sports and stuff. So it was great talking to you and looking forward to, part 5. We talked about that, which will be
Yeah,
the
me
last
too.
part of the series to get all the authors together. That's my
I look
French
forward
coming
to
out
it.
there together.
That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And to be able to talk one last time. So Christine, thanks again for being here on the podcast. I really appreciate
Thank
you.
you.
And you were great.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Appreciate it. Take care.